Elemental magic is something that feels so intuitive to use as a storyteller that the concept of it has been with us probably as long as we've been telling stories around a fire. With such a magic system, it is easy to fall into the trope trap and just have one trope following the other in your magic system. Or, almost worse, to fall into the anti-trope trap and tell a story where you're just changing things to change things and everybody can see that. It feels also like it's been a while since I've spoken about a purely magical topic on this channel, and this is a fantasy world building channel. So today, let's talk about elemental magic. What do I mean when I say elemental magic? So, I'm basically talking about a magic system where you draw power from the elements. Generally, this would be the classic 4+1 configuration. So something like earth, fire, air, water, and then wood, or the void, or the power of friendship, or the avatar sitting in the middle. But elemental systems can also include some oddballs. The Pokemon magic system has got, I think, 9 elements, and one of them is grass. Mistborn uses the actual periodic table of elements to fuel the magic system. But for this video, I'm going to focus on the 4 primary plus 1. Welcome to another episode of Just in Time Worlds with your host, Marie Mullaney. If you like this kind of content and you'd like to help me keep making it, there are links to my Ko-fi page down below, or you can buy my fantasy books on Amazon. Links to both of those down below. And thank you very much to my supporters on Ko-fi. Okay, let's get cracking. With an elemental magic system, it is really important that you have thematic elements that tie the magic system together and brings it into the rest of your world. Now, ideally, any magic system should have tie-ins to the rest of your world. Any magic system should have thematic components. But with an elemental magic system, because it is such a classic, it is really important that you give this some thought and define it up front and build it into your world that you show your readers or players very early on. Because readers are going to come into an elemental magic system with a lot of preconceived notions. They are going to come into it with, the classic configuration, which is shown so well in Avatar: The Last Airbender. Fire users are hotheads. Air guys are normally cheerful and playful. Water is your healing element, your nurturing element. And earth is your rigid and unbending element. So people who use earth are very stern and militant. And if your world works differently and they don't know that from close to the start, when you do then say, oh no, fire knights are actually cheerful people and air people are actually all assassins because air is all about secrecy and lies, they're going to be like, what? When did this happen? Because I'm 200 pages in and no air dude has assassinated anybody else. So what are you talking about? So you have to give those themes good, strong thinking up front. Now, I've already spoken about the classic elements, the fire being hotheads, the earth being very kind of rigid in their approach, water being caring and nurturing, and air being fun-loving and flighty. But you don't have to go that way. Air can be a destructive element. Tornadoes and hurricanes are destructive things. So you could have air be your main damage dealer. Or you could have air be your assassins. You could have them be all about secrets and hiding and sneakiness. You could have water be about holding secrets, holding things down in the depths. You could have water be about death. You go down into the watery grave of the underworld, especially relevant in seafaring communities. You could have fire be life-giving. You could have fire be about returning heat to the body and thus bringing life back into the body. And you could have earth be about nurturing and new life and life sprouting forth from the earth and hence be, a lust-driven and a very life-giving element. So you don't have to go with the traditional themes. Just make sure that it is clear to your readers what your thematic elements are that you are tying into your elements. And you can expand on that. You're not just restricted to binding the elements into your magic system. Catherine Kerr does a great job of having elemental races, and I did a video about that, which you can check out in the information card. But in essence, every fantasy race in her world is tied to one of the elements. Her magic system uses all 5 elements. Each race has a specific affinity to the element that they are most closely tied to as a race. So it's a great thematic setup. You know, the elves are air, the dwarves are earth, and then you've got these selkie people that are water people, and you've got the horse skin that are fire people, and then humans are tied to the 5th element, ether, which is kind of like void, kind of equivalent to the Japanese concept of void in that context. So just give your theme some thought and tie the elements back into your people in a relevant and clear way in order to give your elemental magic that little unique flair that it needs to stand out from the rest. Now, the 4+1 model does lend itself very well to writing a 5-man band. You have one of each element, plus the power of friendship, the dude in the middle, the void mage, the guy who can use all 4 elements, whatever approach you want to take. But the 5-man band is a common trope. Elemental magic is a common trope. So if you're using both in conjunction, make sure you've got a strong theme, make sure you're tying your elements back, and make sure that every character in your 5-man band has got a highly individualized growth path. Like they're starting as a hothead and they're growing to be more patient. They're starting as somebody who is inflexible and they grow to be more flexible. They're starting as an assassin and they're growing to be a hero. They're starting as a power-hungry, raging maniac and they end up as a healer. Whatever the growth path is, each character has to have one. Otherwise, that 5-man band will just blend together into one unified kind of character, and you will lose all of the unique flavor. They'll basically just become personifications of their element rather than being real people. So be wary of stepping too far into the trope there without the necessary understanding of what you need to be unique. And then the last thing on the topic of themes is be careful of your +1 element. You don't want to go too far in this. You don't want to make them too overpowered. Because if you do, they're pretty much going to dominate the story, and then all the other elements do stand the risk of kind of getting lost. They do stand the risk of fading into the background as the power of friendship dude or the void mage or whatever it is, grows into their power and becomes the kind of dominant force. So do be aware of what you're doing with that kind of power level. And if you enjoyed that discussion of the elements and themes, hit the thumbs up button. And let's talk about the actual magic system. So you can use elemental magic as a power source. So there are 4 or 5, depending on your approach, sources of power, and they power different spells. Legend of the 5 Rings, which is a role-playing game that I'm very fond of, uses this for its spell magic. So each spell is associated with a ring. So you have air spells, you have water spells, you have fire spells, you have earth spells. And these spells are themed for that ring. So fire spells are destructive and air spells are all about secrets. That's where my assassination thing in air comes from. Water spells are about healing, and earth spells are often about purification, because in L5R, jade, which is part of the earth, obviously, is a pure element that can cleanse the Shadowlands taint from anyone. So earth mages actually specialize in purification of people who've been touched by the darkness of the Shadowlands taint. And void the fifth element is actually usable by normal people. It becomes that thing that makes you able to do more than what you thought. In role-playing terms, it reduces wounds, it gives you extra dice, it basically, in D&D 5th edition terms, it gives you advantage, but in L5R, it gives you that extra boost that makes you more than just an average Joe. So void is more than just a magical element, it is also intrinsic and central to life, which is always a very, very nice approach to that kind of a system. So you can have it where the elements basically power the spells. Now in L5R's case, it's basically the elemental spirits, the kami, that power the spells, because the Shugenja, the mages, entreat the kami. But the elements empower the spells. But you don't have to go that approach. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, the elements themselves are directly used. Often in that kind of system, it is bound up in martial arts, as it is in ATLA, where you have people, punching and then a beam of fire comes out, or making the water form, the water whip, and lashing each other with it as they did on that riverbank. If you're going to do that, if you're using the elements directly, it does bring up a couple of interesting questions. So first, can you create elements? And if you can create elements, what does that mean for the law of conservation of energy? Remember, energy can't be created or destroyed, it can only be transformed. So if you're creating elements, does that mean that the law of energy conservation doesn't apply in your world? Because that's a big decision. That makes a very interesting world. Or if it does apply, then what happens when you create an element? Is it removed from somewhere else? Is there like a patch where there's just no fire because all the fire mages draw from there when they're creating fire? Like, what happens if you allow the actual creation of elements? Now, I know what you're thinking. You're saying, but Marie, in Avatar, they do create elements. Well, no, they don't. Because in Avatar, they draw the fire out of the air, or they use the air. Or with water, in that terrible bloodbending sequence, the bloodbender draws water out of living things because it's not in the air. There's not enough water in the air to be able to draw from it. But there is in living things. So if you're willing to kill things, you can absolutely draw water out of them and use that to waterbend with. And I think that that is a very interesting question to answer is, do you allow creation? If you don't, what happens if they don't have access to their element? Can they draw it from something else, or do they have to carry their element with them the way that Mistborn mages need to carry metals with them? Another interesting take on that is from Rick Riordan, where Percy Jackson has got elemental magic regarded to water because his father's Poseidon. But he doesn't manipulate water as such. But when he's in water, he is better. He heals in water, and he can move through water better, and water makes him stronger. So that's a case where you're not using elemental magic so much as the element itself supports you, which is also an interesting take on that kind of direct elemental magic. But if you're going to do all of that, if you're going to have, the elements mixing up and you're going to wonder about whether they can be created or whether they can just be used, it also brings up mixing elements. Do you allow elements to be mixed? Do you allow somebody to use both fire and water? What about mud? Does mud belong to water or does it belong to earth? Like, who can access that? So in ATLA, it's very simple. The waterbender would draw the water out, the earthbender would use the earth. But maybe you do have people that can use both elements and they could actually use mud. Or maybe it's not a case of like you're completely cut off from the other element. So in L5R, for example, you have the element you have an affinity to, the element you have a deficiency in, and the two you're neutral towards. But you can use all the elements. It's just that one comes easier than the other. So it's worth thinking about to what level you allow the mixing of elemental magic. Do you go for no mixing, some mixing? Can people mix? What happens if elements are mixed? And that kind of approach to it. How much integration do you allow? And if you like that discussion of the basics of elemental magic, hit the thumbs up button, and let's talk about elemental items. So Final Fantasy is probably the best example of this. There is the elemental affinity items, or the elem attack, and these enhance the elemental damage dealt by the user. So it is very interesting to use items in that fashion, where the item is the thing that does the elemental magic. Now, maybe the item draws from the power of the user. Maybe elemental magic is too wild and too powerful to be used raw. And what has to happen is the mage has to channel the magic through an item. Or the item draws the elemental magic in, and the mage can only access that power through the elemental item. Or maybe it just gives a boost to the mage's ability with elemental magic. But it becomes interesting when it becomes a limitation on the magic. So it becomes like a channeling thing. And also you can make it so that there are magical items that are powered by the elemental mages. So it's a completely normal sword, except in the hands of a fire mage, in which case, it lights up and becomes a flaming sword. Kind of like lightsabers, except for mages of the elemental persuasion. Of course, if you have items, you probably have some kind of ritual magic, because that's generally how you create items, right? So, what do you do with ritual magic? Do you bind the elements themselves? Or maybe the elements are represented with spirits, like they are in L5R. And what you actually do with a magical item is you bind the elemental spirit into the item, and that's what gives it its power. Maybe for ritual magic, you need to be at the nexus point of the 4 elements, as I discussed in my video on lakes. So there I spoke about, a volcano lake, a Caledra lake, being a nexus point between fire and earth and water and air. And that could potentially be a place where you have to go if you want to do ritual magic. Or maybe you can use the elements as a portal to travel to the plane of, the 5th element. And that can only be achieved where you have this nexus of the 4 elements. I always think it's interesting to have such requirements in your ritual magic to go to a specific place or to interact with specific spirits, because it means that ritual magic isn't just something that you can do alone in your tower room and churn out a million items. You have to go to a place, do a thing, a special, thing in a special place. And that puts you at risk, of course, because other people know where this place is. So there can be people who lie in wait for you, or people who come and find you and interrupt your ritual. And that makes it a lot more tense than sitting in your tower room and chanting over, a musty old tome while you generate a million healing potions. And those are my thoughts on elemental magic. If you like this video, check out my video on the anatomy of a ritual and ritual magic. And if you want to connect around this or any other topic, I do have a Discord server linked down below. And I will see you soon for another episode of Just in Time Worlds.